Hello, and welcome to Protecting Microsoft SQL Server at Scale. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. We won't be able to do a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, but we will make sure that the team at Rubrik sees all your questions so they can get back to you. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A, and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we are offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to get started with Rubrik. Also in there, you can find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And with that, let's get to today's presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers from Rubrik today. We have Chris Lumnah, who's Database Solutions Architect, and we have Chris Wolff, who's a Database Solutions Architect as well. So I'm going to turn things over to Chris Lumnah. Chris, the floor is yours.
My name is Chris Lumnah. I'm an Advisory Solution Architect with Rubrik. I've been with Rubrik now for just under 5 years, but before that I spent the previous 15 years as a production DBA. With me I have Chris Wolff. Chris?
Hi everybody, my name is Christopher Wolff. I'm a SQL Server Solutions Architect here at Rubrik. Before this, I was a DBA for a better part of 20 years in many different industries.
So today, we're going to talk about SQL Server with Rubrik and how Rubrik can help meet a lot of the challenges that DBAs have. In our previous lives, we both said we were DBAs. And as DBAs, we had to manage a large, ever-growing environment. Our first priority was always data protection, with users having access to their data being priority 1A. Additionally, we had to make sure that data protection tasks did not affect business operations. Because of this, we always had to think about problems with dealing with the environment. So today, we're going to take you through some of those problems, and Chris is going to show you how Rubrik solves those problems. So DBAs are constantly thinking about issues like, how do we deal with issues of sprawl? How do we keep the data safe? When the data is needed, how do we do it in the most efficient way possible to move with the speed of business? And how do we make sure that data protection tasks do not affect business operations? DBAs will work with business and data owners to define RPO and RTO rules. Based on that information, they define service level agreements, or SLAs. And those service level agreements state how often a backup should run, how long do they need to be kept around for, when should the backup run, where should backups be stored long term, should I copy the backup to a different location? With large, ever-growing database environments, when DBAs want to protect their environment, they have to go to each SQL server and set up these backup jobs. These jobs are designed to meet those business requirements. They have to do the work on each and every server in their environment. Then they have to make sure that all of these jobs are running successful each day. When recovery operations need to happen, there isn't a central spot for the DBA to go to see what backups are available. MSDB, which is the backup catalog for SQL Server, is on each individual SQL server. Now, think about those problems and what I just mentioned, and now compound them by having multiple data centers with database servers in each of those data centers, and having your data also live in the cloud. Because you have this growing environment that extends beyond just your data center into the cloud providers, now you have different tools, different approaches, and different processes that have to be used for data protection.
With Rubrik Security Cloud, you are provided a single pane of glass that centralizes your management of all your SQL servers in different locations, regardless if they sit in your data center or in a cloud provider. This includes SQL Server in a VM, Azure SQL databases, and managed instances, and AWS RDS. Rubrik Security Cloud is the single tool and approach to configure your backups regardless of where they live. With this single pane of glass comes global catalog management. When a recovery needs to happen, the DBA need not to remember. Is the database in the different data center or in the cloud? Is the backup local to the server or archived to tape? What backup files do I need to recover to the point in time required? DBAs can log an RSC, search for the database, and see and select the point in time they need for recovery with a few clicks to start the recovery process. This makes the DBA more efficient and a hero to the users and to management. With this simplified workflow and role-based access controls, you can provide self-service access to enable users to be more agile. Developers can now recover the database they need when they need it without affecting production systems.
So as mentioned on the previous slide, DBAs are creating and managing backup jobs across their environment to meet the SLAs that are defined by the business unit. A lot of the time, the DBA is used to manage all of these jobs. This gets added to when application and development teams create databases outside of the DBA view. These newly created databases need to have backups configured that meet those business unit requirements.
Rubrik uses an SLA domain as a declarative statement to manage the lifecycle of the backup. The SLA domain will define frequency of backups, their retention, when the backup should happen, if the backup should be copied to a separate location, and if long-term retention is required, moving the backup to that archive location, which would release storage back to the environment, all based on the rules set forth by the business units and DBAs working together. The SLA domain becomes a simple to create and read declarative rule set for how backups should be managed. DBAs will apply these SLA domains to SQL servers with a few clicks right from Rubrik Security Cloud. Rubrik will then automatically protect every database on the SQL server. As new databases are created, Rubrik will automatically discover and protect these new databases with the SLA assigned to the SQL server. Now, instead of having a DBA having to remember to set up backups, or worse, forgetting to do so, they can take care of the many other tasks they need to do in a day. All this because they have defined the backup rules and applied them once to a SQL server.
So let's walk through a typical SLA and show the options available for SQL Server. When we create an SLA, you have the option to protect more than just SQL Server. On this page, you can see I have other relational databases such as Oracle, DB2, and SAP HANA. Let's just focus on SQL Server for now. If you see here, we also have Azure SQL databases, Azure SQL managed instances, and an Amazon RDS when it comes to cloud providers as well. In the next step, we're going to answer the first two questions we brought up earlier. How often do I want to take a backup? And how long do I want to retain the backup for? So let's just do that real quick by saying I want to take a backup once a day and keep it for 30 days. You can also say once a month and keep it for 12 months. If I want to, I can also have more granularity. If you click here, you can also see we can have hourly, weekly, yearly. I can also change the time of the month I'd like to do this, whether I want it at the first or the middle of the month instead. Lots of choices here. We go down below, we can answer the next question. When do I take the backup? In this case, we can set a snapshot window. Let's say I wanted to set it for 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. I only want to take my snapshots in that time frame. Rubrik will go ahead and set up for you at that point. If you decide not to use this, though, Rubrik's very good about knowing when to take a good backup. It has a lot of intelligence in the background to help with that as well. On the next section, we talk about where should the backups stay long term. With archiving, we can help with that, and we can push to secondary locations, such as a cloud provider through object storage or a secondary NAS drive. And here I can set a threshold of when I would like to push that information up to the object storage in this case. So let's go to 30 days. And at that point, after 30 days, I'll automatically push those backups up to that new location. I can also enable instant archiving, and the instant archiving will automatically push to that secondary location, but keep it on the Rubrik brick for warm storage. Last question of should I keep the copy in a different location? We offer replication. So in this case, I can move to a secondary location, not in the main data center where I'm taking this backup. So if I pick Detroit in this case, go down to here, and let's say maybe I want to keep it over there for 15 days or so. So I'll keep it there for 15 days, and then that way I have the data in 2 locations just in case. For DR scenarios, things like that. If you look here, we can also add a secondary location just in case we want to have it on 2 locations. In this section, we set that point in time recovery that we're talking about. Going back to the initial question, how often do I want to take a backup? How long do I want to retain it for? I could say I want to keep this for the snapshots for every 15 minutes. And keep it for 14 days. At that point, you just give it a friendly name. Let's say database December. And we'll give it a good description. For SQL Server. And if you go down here a little bit, this goes over all the options we chose for our particular backups. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and create the SLA. So now that we've created our SLA, let's go ahead and assign it to some SQL servers. I'll go to the data center here and go to SQL Server databases. You see I have a list of all my SQL servers ready to go for me. You see we have specific ones here that don't have an SLA assigned. So let's go ahead and do that now. If I go ahead and click these 3, and then I'll hit Manage Protection. And I'll go ahead and hit the Database December SLA here. Down below, you see here we have a copy only section, but let's just stick with the options we've chosen. So click Next, and I'll go ahead and assign that. And at this point, you've assigned to the specific hosts. They'll go ahead and assign the SLA to the instances themselves and also to the individual databases underneath. But let's say I wanted to assign a different SLA to an individual database. So let's go ahead and click inside of here, go to our instance, and this lists all the databases we have. Let's say this Palo Alto one is a data warehouse, and maybe I want to just do a snapshot once a day. So I could click Manage Protection here, and I'll pick the bronze one here. It just takes a snapshot once a day for me. Click Next and assign it. And at that point, you have a direct assignment on the bronze, and it's basically just it's just doing that daily snapshot rather than worrying about transaction logs or any archiving. So real easy, real simple. So we've covered a lot today. The main thing to point out is it's a very simple setup. No need to worry about agent jobs or anything like that. Rubrik will take care of all that for you as long as you have an SLA assigned.
Managing the ever-growing landscape has its own set of challenges that we've shown how Rubrik addresses. But the next set of challenges is protecting those backups, protection from things like man-in-the-middle attacks, ransomware attacks, or accidental deletion. These challenges are additional issues that need to be addressed. They generally require additional tools, processes, and approaches. This adds extra work and complexity for the DBA.
Rubrik keeps your databases safe by encrypting the backup while it is being transferred from SQL Server to Rubrik, then ensuring the backup is encrypted at rest for its lifecycle while managed by Rubrik. With Rubrik Zero Trust by design, your data remains readily available. Services are architected with a logical air-gapped, secure protocols, native immutability, encryption, and access control. Role-based access controls allow for the DBAs to maintain control over their environment. They can add SQL servers, manage what SLAs are assigned to what SQL server, handle backup and recovery operations without having access to objects they do not need. This can be broken down into smaller groups and roles as well. For instance, development teams can be given access to specific databases instead of the entire fleet to provide self-service recoveries to their environments.
As the business grows, so does the size and the number of databases. While the environment grows, the number of business tasks also grows. What does not increase is the number of hours in a day. And while backups are crucial to business continuity and success, they are often forced to low usage times. Because businesses are becoming more 24/7, those low usage times are shrinking. This means DBAs often see their backup windows continuously shrink, and they need to get more done in less time.
Rubrik will intelligently manage backup jobs across the database environment to ensure that backups are being done inside the backup window defined in the SLA domain. Backups done using our incremental forever process that reduces time to complete a backup. With this process, we transfer just the blocks that have been changed. This speeds up the backup process by sending less data across the network and writing to the Rubrik storage. When you add our change block tracking, you further speed up the process. When it comes time to recover a database, Live Mount enables you to recover in minutes rather than hours by recovering the database on Rubrik storage and presenting to a SQL Server host using a secure SMB3 share. The secure share is not browsable on the network and is only accessible by the SQL Server.
DBAs can never recover something quickly enough. There's always a user screaming or a manager looking over their shoulder asking why is the most critical database that is currently broken not fixed yet. In the DBA world, their options are kind of limited. They need to figure out where the backups exist. Do they have enough storage on the host to have a second copy of that backup? If they don't, they have to go talk to the storage team and try to get storage allocated to the server. That in itself is its own process and problem. Then they have to go to the server team and say, hey, can you take this storage that the server team allocated and connect it to my SQL Server? Potentially, they might have to talk to the backup team and say, can you retrieve this backup from tape? That's an extended period of time now. And once they have all these backup files and they start the restore process, then they have to wait for that process to complete. And if they find out at the end of the recovery process that they went through, it was to the wrong point in time, now they have to redo the entire process all over again, making that recovery even longer. This requires the DBA to deal with a lot of process and people outside of their control and requires a lot of time. DBAs are the visual focus while users and managers all look to them to work as fast as possible.
With Rubrik, the DBA always has backups at their fingertips, ready to be used for recovery. Since the SLA domain is able to be configured to take transaction log backups, Rubrik gives the DBA full point-in-time recovery. Rubrik displays the backups in a simple-to-use timeline for easy recovery. We touched on live mount in the last section, but to further expand on the topic, it can be used for operations like object level recovery, backup verification, and development testing. We'll show an example of object level recovery in the demo. Rubrik can also perform a full database in-place restore with just a few clicks. Think of it as an easy button for recovery. Export gives the DBA control of the recovery. This gives more choice for recovery to the same or different SQL Server host without involving other departments. This includes items such as drive locations and file names. Rubrik provides APIs and SDKs through scripting languages like PowerShell or Python to automate various recovery scenarios from a single script.
All right, so let's take a look at an example. Let's use Rubrik, and we'll actually, in this case, we're also going to use some APIs using the PowerShell SDK that we have to do object level recovery. In this example, we're going to go through and show how to recover from a couple of bad events that can happen in an environment. So let's look at things. First thing I want to do is I want to look at the before on the environment. So let's run this query here, and this query is going to show us what databases we have on our SQL Server. So we have a 2 terabyte database here, a 5 terabyte database here, and a few more databases down here. Just so you can see that same exact SQL Server in SSMS, here's the SQL Server that I'm referring to here. Let's dive in a little bit deeper because we're going to use this 2 terabyte database as our example, but size for the most part doesn't really matter in this scenario. So in this case, I'm going to show you a list of the tables that are out on that database, and I want you to pay attention to the district table and the warehouse table. If we look at this table listing here, we can see the district table has about 300,000 records, and the warehouse table has 30,000 records. So let's go do something bad. Let's think about a scenario. A user is doing some work in a database, and they need to clean up. They need to go ahead and delete warehouses 1 through 5. But when they created their query, they forgot to highlight the where clause. So instead of deleting just warehouses 1 through 5, they inadvertently deleted every record in the warehouse table. This is a service interruption event for most applications. Let's look at another scenario. A junior DBA is doing a change. They're doing some development work. They're supposed to be dropping the district table from the development table so they can roll out a new change. But they inadvertently connected to production. So instead of just dropping this table from a development environment, they just dropped the district table from the production database. Both of those are service interruption events. So now let's go look at that environment now. So again, we're going to list out the tables, and we're going to see what's out there. Again, pay attention to district and warehouse. We'll notice that the warehouse table is now empty, and there's no district table. So you can see that we actually did those particular commands. Let's go recover from those bad events. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to live mount the database from the most recent backup that Rubrik has. Now this can be totally done from the UI, but we're going to do this from the API because this just shows that we are API first and that we can do these things right from code. This is helpful because in a lot of cases, DBAs like to use PowerShell to script out different types of operations. They can build out full-fledged recovery scenarios with some PowerShell code. In this case here, we're using live mount. Live mount's going to take a database, basically any size, and recover that back to a SQL Server in just a few minutes. A 2 terabyte database would take several, if not at least almost an hour, if not more, depending on your environment, depending on the size of the database. Instead, we're going to have that database up and running inside of a couple minutes. And this is all done using live mount because what Rubrik does is it does the entire restore operation on the Rubrik storage itself. It reads the backup, it creates the database on the SQL Server, and it goes ahead and attaches those data files from a secure SMB3 share hanging off of the Rubrik device. You don't have to copy that data back across the network and write it down to your storage on your SQL Server side. This 2 terabyte database will be up and running pretty quickly. This can be used not just for things like object level recovery. You could also use it for things like backup validation. What I always tell customers is that if you're not validating your backups, you don't have a backup. So you can live mount very, very quickly and prove that your backup is good. And because if you can restore it, which a live mount is a restore operation, your backup is good. You've just proved that your backup is valid. So in a minute 53, we just mounted and made a 2 terabyte database available back to a SQL Server. And I'm going to cut over SQL Server here, refresh this environment, and show you. I have this new database here called Live Mount. That's sitting right there. If we come back into our notebook, and let's look at the databases that are out there, we can see that the main database, the 2 terabyte database that we worked on first, it's all sitting on mount points, sitting on my local storage. But the live mount, that's sitting on UNC paths. This is all sitting on the Rubrik storage, not on your SQL Server. So I didn't need to talk to a storage team or a server team to get new 2 terabytes added to this server to do this recovery operation. So now let's look at the databases and their sizes. If I look at this, I can see my 2 terabyte database here. My live mount is right here. It's the same size. So let's start recovering things now. I'm going to take the contents from my backup, which is this live mount database here, and I'm going to put it back into the production warehouse table there. So now I run this. I put all 30,000 records back from my backup into my production database. Let's go recover the district table. Now, because that table was dropped, I would have had to have scripted out the table from the live mount and then run it in my production database. So I'll do that first. I already scripted it out and I have the script ready. I've just created the district table in my production database. Now, put the records back. This will now run and put all 300,000 records from my live mount back into my production database. When that's done, we're going to go look at their tables and their sizes to show that the table is back and the records are back. So we have our district table now is here with the 300,000 records. And if I look a little further, the warehouse table is back. Great. Now, I didn't have to go and reach out to all these different teams. I didn't have to go and get new storage allocated to the box. I can now recover those 2 tables that had something very bad happen to them in the entire time of this demo, which was about 5 minutes. Think about that when the next time someone does something inadvertent in your environment and you need to do a recovery. You can't recover a 2 terabyte database in 5 minutes.
We've covered a lot today, so let's do a recap and talk about next steps for you as a customer. Recap here. Rubrik Security Cloud provides a single pane of glass for managing SQL Server environments, both in your data center and in the cloud. Rubrik reduces backup times to fit inside business unit requirements. It also protects your data backups both in flight and at rest with encryption and immutability. Lastly, it utilizes the flexible recovery options to recover what data is needed when you need it. So next steps or additional questions that you might have, reach out to your account team to schedule a health check or a business review, and you can learn more about SQL Server and Rubrik. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, well, thanks, Chris and Chris, for a great overview of protecting Microsoft SQL Server at scale and some really good demos. We really appreciate your times today. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $300 Amazon gift card today is Laura Faulkner from New Jersey. So congratulations to Laura. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.